All right, let's accept it. All right, I am here with Daresha Kyi, who's the director of the movie Mama Bears, which is currently, one of the selections for out on film. And I'll give this information as we go through the interview, Daresha. But Mama Bears, you have to see this. Is going to be at Midtown Art Cinema on Tuesday, September 27th at 7 p.m. I'll repeat that information, and also going to be streaming beginning the 28th until the end of the festival. So, Daresha, it is such an honor to talk to you. Thank you for being here. And I guess my first question, which is a typical question, why Mama Bears? Why this film?
I had to make this film. I felt compelled to make this film. You know, as a documentary filmmaker, you get these mission assignments.
Hmm.
And given the way this country is going in terms of politics and regressive politics and
Right.
repressive politics, I definitely wanted to do something that would help people understand the damage and the stakes. And I also was just deeply inspired by these women and by their courage to transform, because
Yeah.
transformation is not an easy process.
Right.
Risking losing your friends, your family, your church community, everybody you might know, that's not an easy thing to do. And so I found them to be heroic. And I
Hmm.
like to tell stories about badass heroes and heroines.
Well, I in working within the system, right? So I agree with you, the regressive political spectrum we're in. But what I love about your film is it shows that you're not alone. There is an undercurrent of people who are progressive and want better for this nation. If you haven't seen Mama Bears yet, it is about women who became mama bears for their gay, lesbian, transgender children, coming from very conservative backgrounds. So I was raised in Nashville, live in Atlanta, was raised by Republican, conservative Christian parents. And so, my story is one of acceptance when I came out, but I waited till I was 25 to do it, to have the courage to do it because, I had the same fear that everybody else in this position has. And, a lot of people said, well, Melissa, at least your family accepted you. I said, well, I didn't know that until that vulnerable moment. I didn't know what was, but I was so unhappy that I couldn't live the lie anymore. So I didn't care what the result was. I just needed to be free. And that's the theme in this movie. Now, my mother unfortunately is no longer with us, or I'd make her join Mama Bears. But but I remember, Daresha, the moment, I had been involved in the church and was excited by the church. And then it was the church that was the source of all this anti-gay hate. And then it ended up, devolving into anti-trans hate, and we'll talk about that in the movie. But I will tell you that I took my father to lunch, and by the time I would talk to each of my family members individually when I came out, and he was the last. He was the most intimidating, a 6'3" dude who was a ex basketball player, army lieutenant. Like, I just thought, this guy is never going to talk to me again. And so we had lunch, and I said, of all the people, I thought you'd reject me. And
Mm,
his words back to me were, Jesus would never reject you, so why should I? And I have said in speeches since then that moment showed me what a Christian really is.
right, right.
And so let's talk a little bit. How did you find these families? And as a documentary filmmaker, I'm fascinated by, like, what do you have to start off with? And do you just have to kind of follow along as you're filming?
Yes, you do.
Hmm.
You follow the story wherever it goes. I found an article in the Huffington Post about Kimberly's fight for Kai to be able to use the girls' bathroom. Kai is transgender. And she mentioned the Mama Bears. She mentioned that she had found the strength to go from being a Tea Party Republican to winning an award as an LGBTQ activist
Mm.
through the support of these women, and that there were over 2,000 of them, and that number impressed me. And I reached out to, so they support each other through private Facebook groups. And at the time, they were secret Facebook groups, but they support each other through that. And so most of them don't meet, but it's a way for them to connect to each other and to, like you said, understand that they are not alone, that there are many, many families like going through the same thing that they're going through. Because I heard time and again that many of them felt like they were the only Christian parent with a trans kid, or the only Christian parent with a gay kid, or with a lesbian, like, so this idea that you're not alone is very important and very empowering. So I found the admin for the Mama Bears group that I followed, and reached out to her and told her that I was a filmmaker and I wanted to make a movie, and I thought these women were courageous, and did, what did she think? And she said, well, I think that's a great idea. Send me an email detailing what you'd like to do, and I will send it out to the moms and we'll see how they respond. So I wrote an email telling them what I thought and asking if they were interested for them to send me a little bit about their journey and where they were on the journey. And I got 25 responses.
Wow.
At the time, I was living in New York. I live in Atlanta now, but I was living in New York. And Liz Dyer, who is the administrator for the Mama Bears, told me that Sarah Cunningham was coming to New York on her first Free Mom Hugs tour. So that was a no-brainer. Of course, I'm going to shoot with her because she's in my backyard, literally. I mean, I don't live in Stonewall, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Figuratively, not literally.
That's like Atlanta. We all live in different places in Atlanta, but we all say Atlanta. It's just easier. Yes,
Right,
yeah.
right, right. So I met Sarah. We actually went to Philly, which was the second to last stop. Her last stop was Stonewall Inn on that tour. And before that, she was at a homeless shelter called Home for Hope. That was for homeless LGBTQ people. And she just wanted to meet the people. They stopped at 10 cities, and that was the 9th city. And the last one was Stonewall Inn in New York City. So I went and shot with her at this homeless shelter in Philadelphia. And then we shot with her at Stonewall Inn. And I just fell in love with her. And I just knew instinctively that she had not even formed the nonprofit for Free Moms Hug. It was just an idea that she had for how could I support the community, in this really scary time when Trump had been elected, and we knew there were going to be rollbacks and there was going to be repercussions. And so that was what she came up with, and I could see that was going to snowball. I could just see it, because it was a great idea, and it
Well,
was an important
so I
idea.
didn't know about Kai's story. I knew about her story, the hugs, because I remember so my baby mama, as I call her, she and I are no longer together, but we have a son together. And her mother is still alive and lives, has moved near us. We've all moved near each other so that our son has his family together. Um, and so I remember telling her about that story because I said, she is these women. She is the conservative Christian who berated her daughter. And then when she finally figured out this is not going to change, then she embraced her daughter. And this is all happening while she and I were together. And so then she embraced me and our son. And so I showed her about the free hugs. And it's so funny when I watched this movie, I thanked her. I said, I haven't thanked you in a long time because this has been years ago, but I'm like, I haven't thanked you in a long time for being who you are. And I told her about Mama Bears, and I said, this is something you should be a part of because these are your people. And in the movie, you depict, people who have transgender children, people who have a gay son. You talk about a lesbian and her mother, and just it was just, again, I said off air because again we're talking to Daresha Kyi, who is the director of Mama Bears, and off air I was like, this triggered so much in me. I'm so excited about this movie because as you filmed in the Stonewall Inn, and every time she gave a hug, and just the clenching embrace, because you're a child when you have to deal with this. I mean, I think people forget that the people who are going through this, the children who are gay and transgender, and for all the letters, um, are dealing with this when they're children, and they need someone to help them through it. They're not adults. Everybody, talks about these decisions you make, and all. It's like, I'm a child, and you need to help me through this. And like you said, they are heroes because even though they started out caving into their environments, they realized their children were more important than anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand they're not educated on gender and sexuality. So you were saying, your children going through it. A lot of people don't think children know enough to know their sexuality or
Right.
that they have gender dysphoria, right? They think they're too young, right? And so that's part of it, is that, there's this level of denial and this lack of education. I think that people want to think of gender and sexuality in black and white terms, in
Mhm.
binary terms, that there's only male and female, right? And that there's only straight or gay, right? But the reality is much, much more complex, And when I'm talking to people who have that kind of black and white understanding, I introduce them to the reality of intersex people.
Mhm.
And that kind of like blows the lid off, right? Because if you believe that God created everyone, and they do, right? And
Mhm.
these people are not male or female or both,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Then that kind of like blows your male or female out the water, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not that simple. There, just as there is a spectrum in life, in other areas, there is a spectrum in both gender and sexuality. And
Right.
so I think a big part of it is education, having the correct information, the scientific information for people who believe in science,
Mhm.
and that can make a huge difference. I mean, even for like Kimberly, one of the things that helped her was understanding what transgenderism is, that there is a biological component to it. It's not just I feel like a girl. No, there are physiological things that happen to
Mhm.
children to make them transgender, to be born that way, right?
Right.
And because she started studying nursing, she learned about it, right? She also learned that about the suicide rate
Yeah.
for transgender kids. So those two things, I think, were turning points for her, because I don't think a lot of parents understand how high the stakes are for their
Yeah.
children and for them, because you can reject your child, but if your child is still living, that's one thing, right? But once you lose your child, as Linda Robertson did, it's a whole different ball game,
That
and it,
was heartbreaking because the at the point where she said, "I had prayed to not have a gay son," and she got her wish.
yeah,
You
it's
know, like, it
devastating.
just, and
Devastating.
yeah. I mean, so I'm curious when you do this film because I cried so many times through it. At what
Mhm.
point, if you don't mind me, looking behind the camera, at what points of your filming did you find yourself becoming emotional and to the point of tears?
I'm a very emotional person, and I am a very empathetic person. And so I cry in most interviews. If the person cries, I cry with them.
Mhm.
And I think that that's part of the reason why people open up so much to me, is because I'm with them on the journey. And as they're telling their story, I'm feeling it. And um, I think that creates a safe space for them to be vulnerable, for them to share their stories,
Yeah.
because they can tell that I care, that I'm not
Mhm.
just there asking, okay, let me see what my next question is.
Right.
And much like what we're having now, it's a conversation.
Mhm.
I'm asking you questions, but they're based on your story, and they're based on what you're telling me, and they're based on what you told me before, because one of the things I always do is pre-interview people before I interview them. So I
Mhm.
have a broad outline of what their journey has been like, right?
Right.
So it starts with that initial email where I say, hey, tell me a little bit about who you are and where you are. That's the first interview, actually, right? Where they tell
Mhm.
me, the broad strokes. And based on that, now I can go a little deeper, right? And so then I call them up on the phone and we have a phone interview, or we do a Zoom call and I record it, right?
Yeah.
So now I have a lot more detail about where you've been, where you're going, where you're at. And it allows me to visualize what your journey is going to look like. Now, you asked me about following the story, right? Things change. That I never
Right.
could have predicted that Sarah would go viral twice, right?
Right.
Those things they happen. You just document them because they're happening.
You had a mom drop out. You had a
I
mom drop out of the filming. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
that's a what do you
Well,
call it?
If all of a sudden you had a glip in the interview, I almost gave something away I shouldn't have.
It's all
Thi
good.
this is a good time. So we like, this is a good edit point. This is a good time, because Daresha's talking about how we're having a conversation, but I do have some business to attend to, so let me give the date out again. If you want, you have to see this film. Midtown Art Cinema is showing Mama Bears Tuesday, September 27th at 7 p.m. If you can't make that, if you can't change your schedule, which you should, just a hint, but it is streaming the next day on the 28th through the end of the Festival for Out on Film. So
I will
I,
be there on the 27th.
let me do that again, because at Midtown Art Cinema, you will have the special appearance by director Daresha Kyi for Mama Bears. I mean, again, it is a triggering film, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, like I will warn you, it's uncomfortable to watch parts of it, but it's worth it because you get the payoff. Like, you talk about how during the Hugs tour in Philadelphia at the homeless shelter. Like, to me, that's one of my favorite scenes of what they do in the home, like, because these mothers care, right? And they're not just caring about their own children, they're caring about others. Spending time with, and that's why it's uncomfortable, because it will remind you of what you've been through. I don't know anybody of the LGBT plus community that has not suffered at the hands of some ignorant church telling them something horrific. And I think and after watching this movie, I told somebody, I said, the ultimate sin to me are these churches who are spewing this propaganda.
Hatred, because it's hatred. And
Yes.
for me, the main message of Mama Bears is unconditional love, the
Mm.
power of unconditional love, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what these women are embodying, unconditional love. And they, like what your dad said,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus wouldn't reject the LGBTQ community.
Right.
He would never do that. Jesus was attracted to and supported and championed outcasts and marginalized people, and people that were thrown away by society. And if the LGBTQ community isn't that, then I don't know who is.
Right.
Do you know what I
Right.
mean? And so Jesus would have been on our side.
Mm-hmm.
Period, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the film challenges Christians to dig a little deeper into their faith and to look at the ways in which, like there's that thing that Kimberly says when she apologizes to the LGBTQ community, and she says, I was a hateful reflection of a loving God.
Yeah.
That is so deep to me.
Very powerful. And it's the truth, right? Because it is all I've always been fascinated by, and no disrespect to anybody of any faith or no faith. I mean, whatever your belief system is, and it's meant to be different. We're meant to be different in individuals. But I always was fascinated at the time I was going through most of my journey, the tough part of my journey, and saying this, you know, thousands-year-old book you're putting between me and you. Like, you're putting this in interpreted, translated piece of material that I know is sacred, and that's why I mean no disrespect, but that is what you're choosing over somebody who is right in front of your face and a member of your family.
Yeah.
Darisha, I am a mother now to, and he looks like he's straight, so I will deal with that. But he is an 8-year-old child,
Mm-hmm.
and so he goes to faith-based school, which is something we chose to do, and it was a hard decision. So this is on the flip end. As the gay parents, we both left the church because of their doctrine on homosexuality. But when we had our own child, we're like, we want him to have at least the experience of being in a faith-based community, even though we haven't been able to find one for him on Sunday mornings.
Mm.
And so we found a place, and we were cautious, but the activist who was asking the questions, and they have been a beautiful community of inclusion, not only from race, not only from gender, not only from sexuality. I mean, like, they are committed to being exactly what my father said. And so the chaplain happened to be in my son's classroom, and it's a female chaplain, which I also championed. And so she was in the classroom, and they do, these sacred stories. And so she was about to do a sacred story, but she came in a little early this year. And it was in a day where the kids were introducing themselves to the other kids in the new class. And she said, I just had to email this to you because I thought you would find this important. And so I get choked up. And so this straight chaplain sent me this story about how my son stood up in class and they said, tell us some things about you. And my son said to the class, I've got two moms. And
Mm.
everybody in the class, and this is, boys and girls of all races said, oh my God, how cool. And then my, and then my son responded and said, right. And she said, I thought you would find that important. And it brings tears to my eyes because me at that age, there was no way I could have done that. And so I paused when I got that email because I don't ever want to take for granted when somebody is doing something great, when his class is accepting, when he is proud to say that he has two mothers in front of his classroom, knowing that they're going to think it's cool too. And it that's something I could never have imagined when I was younger. And so the same with Mama Bears.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that you made this movie will bring good tears by the end to the eyes of the people that watch this because it is hope.
It's cleansing. Tears are cleansing. People like, you made me cry. I'm like, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Crying is good. I always like to say there's more room out than in. But I want to go back to something you said about the, you said something like you didn't say small, but that there's a contingent of people who support LGBTQ rights. And I just want to clarify for me that it is the majority of people. And there is a lie that is being perpetuated that most Americans don't believe in LGBTQ rights. That's not true. If you look at the statistics, most Americans do believe in equality. And there is a small faction of people who don't, who have taken control, right? Who
Well, a
have
good way. I'm
who
glad
have
you.
who have gerrymandered and rigged things and cheated to take control, right?
I'm glad you said that because it makes me think. Reverse your mentality that if something is feeling threatened, it makes the most noise.
Exactly. So
So
I
they're
just
not
want to be
empowered;
clear
they're more
about that.
threatened.
Right. I just want to be clear about the fact that most people believe that the LGBTQ community should have the same rights as they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether whoever they are.
I find that not only LGBTQ community, friends of mine who are of minority races, it's those
Wait,
messages.
we about to be the majority.
That's our yes, yes, yes.
That's the other reason
You're
why certain people are losing their minds.
you're
Okay.
exactly right. Yes, and justifiably so. And I think that that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's to your point. It's the same with women who are the majority of the country. But somehow these messages we were given as children, right? I don't see myself on television. I'm supposed to be the woman and the guy is the dominant one. I'm supposed to do what, be perfect for him. I have this theory that, the way that we do dating is a horrific thing for girls because the girl has to wait on the guy to ask her out, has to wait on the guy to call her, has to wait on the guy to propose to her. And you're setting women up for failure by allowing them to sit and be perfect and wait for somebody to give them something.
Take away
Um,
their agency.
right. And so I think it shows Mama Bears specifically shows that there is a struggle to overcome what you were told as a child. Like it's almost like that so
Well,
many
and
of
what
us
we're being told now.
and what we're being that reinforces that initial message and how we at least for
It's
me
called disinformation and
disinformation,
misinformation, right?
right.
And it's there's a thing called propaganda, right? Where you tell the people what you want them to believe, and if you keep telling them enough, they start to believe it, right?
Mm-hmm. And if you start them young, then it's even more powerful.
And it's
So,
yeah,
so for Mama Bears, I mean, again, I think it's showing, like you said, you're telling the truth. You're telling the truth that a lot of gay kids, and a lot of straight parents who were faith based parents are being manipulated without realizing they are.
Right. So there was this thing that happened, I guess, in the 70s with evangelical Christianity, where the Republican Party aligned itself with evangelism and kind of hijacked Christianity in a way. So that, a lot of evangelicals think that in order to be a Christian, I have to vote Republican. Where did that
Right.
come from? What happened to the separation of church and state? Why are politics in the
Right.
church, right?
Agreed.
And that was very deliberate. That was very calculated, very deliberate, and choice and effort made by the Republican Party to insert itself into conservative Christianity, right? So because they know that, if they can get conservative Christians riled up about homosexuality or abortion, those two hot topics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they will vote with them,
Right.
right? And then they can pass all kinds of other legislation because now you're
Right.
serving God, right? And so it's really important for people to understand that that is not, like Jesus railed
Oh,
against politics
my
and
favorite
the
scene in the
alignment of
Bible is when
politics
he
and
smashed
religion.
those money tables.
You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying?
Yes.
It's like, and people forget that. It's like, how are you being told how to vote by
Right.
your pastor?
Right. Agreed. Yeah, and yes. So I agree with you on the reflection, and even one of the mothers talks about her bringing science and religion and realizing if you they're together, they work together, they don't work separately, and it was her interpretation that was off.
Right.
And I thought that was a powerful statement because you with my son, I try to, there's some things that he's learning that and it's not a non-inclusive thing, right? So, like I said, I'm very comfortable with the school, but there's still certain parts of Christianity that in the teachings that I'm not so into. But I have used it as an opportunity instead of to challenge what he's telling me. It's more of to make him understand. Well, my belief system's different. This person's belief system is different, and you have to be so in tune with who you are and what you believe, and I will support that. And so I've tried to use that because to me that's a powerful tool when it comes to faith, is instead of doing what everybody else is telling you, that's just an example. That's what, that's an offering.
It's a
But you
suggestion.
it's just a suggestion, but it's the point is to be loving and kind and inclusive. That's the point,
Exactly.
right? I
Exactly.
mean,
Yeah. I mean, that's what Jesus said. All the other commandments hang on loving God and loving each other.
yeah. And here we are still. But, tell us, is there anything that I don't know, in your belief system that you had at the beginning of the film that changed at the end or was reinforced through this process?
Well, not in terms of my spirituality or my faith, but in terms of my understanding of um, evangelical Christians, right? And fully understanding that most of the harm that is done out of love. That was a revelation to me, because people, if you, as Sarah did, and a lot of Christians, fundamentalist Christians, believe in the concept of hell and believe that if you're LGBTQ, you're going to hell and you're going to burn for all eternity. Well, then, yeah, you're going to do everything you can to save your child, to save their soul, right? That's your job as a parent. Is your first job is to protect your kid, right? So, like Linda Robertson and her husband, everything they did was done out of love. They weren't trying to harm their son. They weren't trying to make him hate himself. They weren't trying to make him suicidal. They were trying to save him. So for me, that was like, so there was that. And then the other thing that I came to understand that I didn't really, really think about was this idea that, a lot of LGBTQ people struggle for years with their sexuality, right? So one guy said to me, so if it took me years to come to terms with it, why would I expect my parents to come to terms with it overnight
Mm-hmm.
or in
Well,
an instant?
yeah.
And I thought that's absolutely right. So he said, I have to give my parents grace, and understand that it's a process. There's coming to terms. This it's a process. You don't just snap and go, oh, okay,
Right.
unless you already were there. But if you're not there, you don't get there instantaneously. None of the women in the film got there instantaneously.
Right.
Right.
And neither did my
Right.
son's grandmother
It's
either.
a
I mean,
process, right?
it was a difficult process, but she got there.
Right. But she got there out of love.
Out of love. Exactly.
Mhm.
And getting to know, like, getting to know me and getting to understand our relation and I know with my mother, it was it wasn't as painful process for me as it was for my baby mama. But, I just remember my mother saying, "You were happy." Like, she didn't think about how unhappy I might be until she had the contrast, and she
Right.
was like, "You're happy. I
Finally,
want you to be
finally happy.
happy."
Right. And that's
And
what
it was a
parents want.
difference. So,
Right.
all right, well, I could talk to you all day because I just love this movie. Midtown
Thank
Art
you.
Cinema is where you can see this, and Daresha is gonna be there at the screening at the Midtown Art Cinema on Tuesday, September 27th at 7 PM. You can see her beautiful face there, and then if you can't make it for some reason, if you have a good excuse, or like me, you'll wanna watch it as many times as you can, then it will be streaming Wednesday, the September 28th, until the end of Out on Films Festival.
And
So, Daresha,
if you
I
come to the screening, there's gonna be a little reception afterwards and we can talk.
yay. Well, I mean, again, I think this is one of the most important films that Out on Film has ever shown
Aw.
because I truly believe that this is a shared experience. Mama Bears is an organization that allows these women to know they're not alone. But my goodness, I think for a lot of gay kids, lesbian kids, trans kids, you got to see this to realize you're not alone. Your experience was not unique. You're there with a community of people, and Daresha is there to bring it all together. So, thank you so much for what you've done.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here and to meet you and to chat with you today.
All right, that was fun. I could.